The issues they've had, many of them are companies that are American or were American. One company is a good example. They have created, this is actually a typical, almost generic example. They have created enterprise grade exchange software, and they are launching exchange, but they're also selling the software as a white label thing, right? So we've seen other companies like this. And what happened is they moved from Hong Kong to the US, and then the SEC came out with its pronouncement. So they had already just moved and spent a lot of money and time and effort, and people had moved their families. And so come to find out they have to move again because they are, were experiencing those problems. So we ended up doing sort of a survey of all of the places they could possibly go, and I thought it would be useful to talk about that here, to just so you see who you're competing against, who is Bermuda competing against in terms of other forums in the world, crypto and blockchain companies, and why would they want to move to a different forum. So, and we took so many of these calls last year that we found that we had to actually come up with a grid of different attributes of different places. And the way we came out on it is to think about it almost regionally, because choosing a different place to domesticate your business has a lot of practical considerations. And the blockchain companies, this is a really exciting industry for me because they really think internationally. I mean, we're seeing projects come out of Bulgaria and Mexico and South America and Malaysia and they're in communication with each other. They know about the other blockchain companies. They're talking to them in the forums every day. They're seeing them at the conferences. They know each other personally. They've shaken each other's hands and partied together. So it's just a very interesting community in that regard. So we started to sort of break it down on geographically, because we found that if you're going to do, we sort of ask a bunch of questions. Are you going to do most of your business in the US? Are you going to do most of your business in Europe? Or are these things completely irrelevant to you? And so we found that it would be better for a company that's out of Europe, doing most of its business in Europe, to domesticate in, for example, Malta, or Estonia, or Switzerland, just because it's easier culturally, it's easier practically, because the other areas also have a requirement of having a presence. So a company organizing in the US, the Caymans or Bermuda or BVI is better. And I think, who's the winner in the Caribbean region? It's the next question we asked was, and this gets to, are they nefarious or not? Right? Yeah. Are you looking for more regulation or not? Right. And this is one of the few times in the technology business when we've seen companies running toward regulation instead of away from regulation. Because if you go to, because there were a lot of countries that sort of are happy to have new companies come to their country, and they're sort of like, yeah, we'll do anything you want. Well, that's not really what you need in this industry. You need to come correct. You need to have a real regulatory authority so that you can be legitimate. And so where we came out on that is, and this is just what we would recommend. They would have to then research it themselves to say what they wanted. And many of them did want to come to Bermuda. They were, I wouldn't say put off, but reticent because of the cost of being in Bermuda. But I would have to say the more legitimate ones sort of overcame that because they saw Bermuda as a more legitimate place to do business, where there was already another industry that had created a place here, and where Bermuda was actually coming out with regulatory oversight and a regulatory structure in which to operate. And this becomes interesting on an international law perspective because we spoke quite a lot about the U.S. regulations yesterday, and I was sort of hoping we would get to this conversation. What is it like to be a company that's operating outside the U.S. but that does affect the U.S.? And lawyers and other professionals tend to give you the safest answer. You can't really. There's nothing in the law that says that an American citizen can't buy something that comes from another country, including a security. So a lot of times you'll hear people say, "Well, we have to block out the U.S. We can't sell to U.S. investors." It isn't really true. I mean, I will never, as an American citizen, agree that I am unable to buy something from another country. I mean, if you look at our Constitution, that's not what we were ever supposed to be about.
If that company were to sell you their security, does that put that company under the jurisdiction of U.S. securities law to protect you?
Right. So that's exactly the right question. So go ahead.
Yeah. So the key challenge is, so Bermuda's focus is really about risk management. That's our bread and butter. Our regulations are designed around sitting down with you, going through your business and making sure you've tackled and identified your risks. So that has set us at a very high regulatory standard compared to other jurisdictions, because we really want to make sure that you're not going to get hacked. You're going to do best practices. You're going to have adequate custody, so you're not going to be like Rodriguez again.
Right.
And that helps develop our reputation. But it's a serious need. We have companies that are actively talking to me that say
Bermuda is sort of the high watermark in terms of, in the Caribbean region, in terms of regulation and safety, and that's what a lot of these companies are excited about with regard to Bermuda.
The key challenge you have, and this is what I get people who ask me, oh, well, can I just call it a security token? What's the difference? And then raise from Americans in other jurisdictions. Well, the key problem is effectively that if you raise money from around the globe, you still need to be cognizant of the securities laws of those countries, because it comes down to a very simple thing. If you decide that, let's say you raise a whole pile of money publicly, if you decide to travel through any of those countries that you raise money from and you violated local laws, you become a very quick target for them to try and get some nice tax revenue from you.
Right. Well,
and that's, I think, the challenge of, like, as much as
taxes is another area. So that's the thing. There's so many different ways that you could run a straight of the law.
But this is the challenge of whether or not you fall under the U.S. securities laws, is that U.S. investors may still be able to invest in it, but the owners of the company, if they ever travel through the States, put themselves at risk of being pursued for.
Well, you're presuming a bunch of things there that I want to just start a little further. So, what's really barred? What barred is, so it's the solicitation rules that we're talking about. What's barred is not me as an American citizen buying a security from somewhere else.
Yeah, so
what's barred is the issuer promoting those securities to American citizens in the absence of a registration.
Yes, and one of the key, I think, misconceptions is that Bermuda is driving forward progressively on regulations around this and setting a standard that we expect the U.S. will move towards, because we work closely with their regulators. They're guiding by case law. If you are in a position where you're like, well, I'm not really certain, I'm doing everything possible, I'm filing my regulatory filings, but there's still that kind of gray area, you have some advantage of being here in that you're not then a big target in the States as they figure out what they're doing. Because the last thing you want to do is end up in court, basically go, like, you've done everything right, but you've got to spend a year in court documenting and showing how you did everything right to finally find out, yes, it's fine, but they wanted to actually prove it in court, and your company was the test case.
Well, this is what I wanted to address, is that, we, as you were talking about, the reality is you have until 2022 to, for this whole thing to work, right? We have a similar situation in the U.S. Our president changes every 4 years or every 8 years, as the case may be. And under Clayton, you're not going to see any changes. We're moving very slowly. We're going to continue to move very slowly. We're going to, as blockchain people, we're going to have to move around that fact. And so think about what the rules really are and think about what the situation really is. Really, they've just made statements. There's no case law. It takes 18 months. There's only 4,000 employees at the SEC. It takes 18 months for them to bring a claim. And so, yeah, you don't want to be the test case. So you don't want to be the company with the target on your back.
Yeah, and one of the key things to recognize is a lot of our regulator, we have one regulator, and a lot of the people who work there come from the Canadian and US regulators. I mean, they have backgrounds from there, they have relationships with there. We maintain a very good channel of communication. So, I mean, at least you're getting the safety of, we try to maintain the highest standard of equivalency or higher requirements than what the US does. Like, I had a company complaining to me the other day.
The issue is that the truth is the SEC doesn't really know what to do with this.
And that's why at least
and
coming
so what they're
here,
doing is they're saying, just comply with the securities laws. We've already written the laws. We have 50 years of case law.
The trouble is that the laws go back to 1933, 1934, and 1940,
Right.
and none of those really pertain here. And even some random orange grove situation from the 40s probably doesn't pertain here either. And so, you know, the challenge has always been to be support innovation, and not to and you know when that's actually part of my talk. But it's like, you know, you're hitting people's nerves when you see lobbyists citing laws that came into existence 100 years before the technology you're speaking about happened, as a means to stop it right dead in the tracks, rather than embrace it because it represents a future.
Right.
So I won't. But I'm living in that space.
This is you know, my advocacy here is I don't like to see innovation being chased out of the United States.
Right.
That's what the effect of
But the U.S.
approach
it's the stakeholders. It comes down to like what Jeff said. It's that if the stakeholders are trying to protect their fiefdom, they're not open to the new technology and to the new way of really doing things. And that may leave the U.S. behind.
Right.
And it
So
may just be
it
just may be what is.
It is what it is. I think that's what it is. And you have to, as an entrepreneur, you have to say, okay, if you don't want us to do business in your country, then we won't.
I mean,
and so that then where does that leave you?
We are a world economy today.
Here. Come
So where that leaves you is this distinction between the solicitation rules and you may not sell securities to Americans, I think is really important. And I think that we can actually push the envelope a little harder here than we do.
There are other ways of doing it as well. And looking at how reinsurance has worked over time, it's saying, are there more efficient capital structures that we can create in Bermuda that can provide access to Americans to invest in and be a part of this, but stay within some of the guidelines that exist today?
Right.
And
that's where I'm going with this. That's exactly where I'm going with this, is that Bermuda can create and has created regulations around this that the U.S. can't really, the U.S. can't really challenge those regulations. The U.S. can only say, you may not solicit to our investors unless there's a U.S. registration. And I had the privilege to personally work on one of the more fun cases that was in this area back in 1992 when I was at the SEC. There was a guy named Crazy Eddie who sold electronics.
Crazy.
These places were insane. So Crazy Eddie decided to, take a bunch of that stuff on consignment and then not pay the people who he took the equipment from. And then also not give people refunds. So he took all the money and put it in Switzerland. And this is relevant to the blockchain right now. So 2 SEC enforcement officers flew to Switzerland to arrest Crazy Eddie, and they got arrested by the Swiss police, who said you can't enforce your rules in Switzerland. If he goes back to the U.S., to your point, then you can nab him there, but you're not going to nab him on our soil. And I wouldn't say that should be the attitude that Bermuda adopts, and everything you just said. You can say we have the highest standards in the Caribbean. We have regulated these industries, and this offering is legal under Bermuda law, and you can't enforce U.S. law in Bermuda.
So the key thing that I really want to reiterate is when you work with the BMA, they have this risk-based approach, which is you document out what you think the risks are, and they go through it with you, like in depth. And this is why we've had DABO applications in for months, and people are giving really great feedback, even though it's taking a long time, because they really make you flush out your business to the point where you don't have a lot of concerns that you have even once the U.S. starts opening up, because you kind of know that's where it's going to go.
Well, that's the way I would say it, exactly like that, that you should be thinking in terms of we need to operate our business now. We're a startup company. We're running out of money. We can't wait 5 years until there's no Clayton, or 15 years, however long it takes. We need to do what we're doing now. So we're being as compliant as we possibly can, but we're going to push the envelope, and we're going to continue to sort of demonstrate that there should be evolution and change in the U.S. securities laws in this area.
And just one more point, actually, is it's also looking at what are the needs of the industry, and that's where we need more feedback. If you're trying to base yourself in the States or here, or you're trying to open yourself up to American investors, how can we really create efficient structures to make that possible? I mean, it could be trying to launch like I've had one venture capital company make the suggestion that, it's only a concept, so not to be said that we're doing this or anything, but trying to say, could the government sponsor, like just basically endorse, but not actually run it itself, an STO launch that invests in businesses in the industry and have a global advisory board behind it. And I mean, it's an interesting thought to say that you could readily raise capital into a centralized structure that may be large enough to put into the American investment markets that give you access to a lot of the companies that are attracted to you.
I think it's a great idea. And another thing that Bermuda can do is, as the industry develops, we were talking about security tokens, and from a legal perspective, security tokens, or I should say tokenized securities, are in a relatively clear regulatory state. It's just a security. We decided to make it digital. So we have regulations for that, and we can comply with them. We should comply with them to the extent that we can. Where we still don't really have good, clear regulatory guidances with utility tokens or really any other kind of token. And what Bermuda can do is to continue to observe the companies that are created and the tokens that are created, and possibly work on definitions that would clarify what tokens are not securities, and create that distinction, create maybe other regulatory frameworks. Because if I were to go back in history and apply the way that the SEC has treated this and the pronouncements of the SEC, then I have to call out United Airlines and everyone, and I have to call out baseball card sellers, and I have to call out all of the other things that were never deemed as securities before, that sort of slipped by this definition, and the innovation in this industry in that area is a massive amount of innovation, and so that's something that Bermuda can do, is to work on definitions that would distinguish certain of these tokens as not being actually securities.
But I think that's the whole thing, is that we're intentionally not providing definitions. So the only definition we have is that if you're doing a loyalty scheme or an online game token, like for video games, that's not regulated. Like, you can come here, you can set those up. If it doesn't end up being a payment mechanism, then you can launch those without having to worry about the Digital Asset Business Act or digital asset issuance.
What does it mean, payment mechanism?
Basically, I think it's anything that you could still buy things with it. It's that you could. I'd have to.
Sort of zero leakage. You can't withdraw it out of the
exactly. Yeah.
Change it into cash.
That
change.
Yeah.
You can't go to
well,
fiat, I guess.
you can't go to fiat, basically.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure.
Should I go to Bitcoin? So kind of like imagine Valve made Valve credits to buy games on their Steam App Store. It's
a loyalty, like a loyalty token within an ecosystem. So it's not spendable outside of the ecosystem, right? So a real utility. Yeah. So the whole premise then is that our definition of digital asset is broad, because we're not worried about the securities laws in the States. I mean, you want to come and do a utility token, you come and do it. It's only whether or not you think the states is going to harass you later because you fall into the gray area that they're going to be.
The solicitation
Yes,
rules.
if you're
So I just want to make that, if you take away nothing else from what I've said here, think about the solicitation rules and think about your token in terms of how does it fall astray of those rules. Because what we've done is to come up with structures that allow American investors to invest in these tokens, even though the issuer hasn't complied with the U.S. securities laws.